Imagine a silence. A warm summer morning in Europe, June 1914. The streets of Sarajevo are alive with parades, laughter, and flags. But hidden in the crowd are young men, their hearts beating fast, their hands trembling, each carrying a weapon and a deadly dream. They believe that one moment, one shot, will change the fate of nations. And they are right. Because in a few minutes, the world will take a step into its darkest nightmare, the Great War. But before we dive into this gripping story, let me tell you this. History is not just old books and dusty memories. It's alive, it's dramatic, and it teaches us lessons we cannot afford to forget. If you want more stories told like this, raw, powerful, and unforgettable, then hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and share it with your friends, because this journey is just beginning. Now, let's step into the fire. For decades before that fateful day, Europe was like a giant powder keg, stuffed with gunpowder, ready to explode. Nations had been arming themselves with bigger guns, stronger armies, and deadlier ships. Germany had risen as an industrial and military powerhouse, challenging the old empires of Britain and France. Austria-Hungary was holding on to dozens of ethnic groups that wanted freedom, while Russia saw itself as the protector of Slavic peoples, especially Serbia. These rivalries weren't just political games. They were a storm waiting to burst. There were alliances too, invisible chains binding nations together. On one side stood the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On the other side, the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia. It looked like balance, but in truth, it was a trap. If one country was attacked, others would rush in, like dominoes falling. Add in the pride of nationalism and the greed of imperialism, and you had the perfect recipe for disaster. And then came Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was traveling with his wife Sophie. To him, it was just another official visit, a show of imperial power in Bosnia, a land Austria had taken under its wing. But for nationalists in the Balkans, he was a symbol of oppression. Among them was a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip. With other conspirators, Princip positioned himself along the Archduke's route. Their mission: assassinate the heir and strike a blow for freedom. The first attempt failed. A grenade missed its target, injuring bystanders, but not the Archduke. The parade continued, shaken but determined. Hours later, fate intervened. The driver took a wrong turn. Suddenly, Franz Ferdinand's car stopped right in front of a cafe where Gavrilo Princip was standing. Seizing his moment, he stepped forward, drew his pistol, and fired. 2 shots, and the Archduke and his wife slumped in their seats. That sound echoed far beyond Sarajevo. It was not just the end of 2 lives. It was the spark that lit the world on fire. Austria-Hungary, furious and humiliated, blamed Serbia. Backed by Germany, they sent an ultimatum so harsh that Serbia could never fully accept it. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. And with that, the dominoes began to fall. Russia, bound by blood and Slavic pride, mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany, fearing encirclement, declared war on Russia. Within days, Germany also declared war on France, and to strike quickly, it invaded Belgium. That move pulled Britain into the war because Britain had sworn to defend Belgian neutrality. Within 1 week, the continent was burning. What started as a single assassination had spiraled into the First World War. Soldiers marched off to battle, waving flags, singing songs, believing the war would be over by Christmas. Families kissed their sons goodbye, thinking they'd return as heroes. Nobody imagined the horror that awaited. Trenches filled with mud and rats, skies raining steel and fire, fields painted with blood. This was not going to be a short war. This was going to be 4 years of hell. But wait, before we go further into the chaos of the trenches, let me pause here. If you're hooked already, then you know this isn't just history. It's a story of humanity itself. Ambition, pride, sacrifice, and tragedy. And to keep following this journey with me, don't forget to subscribe right now and hit that bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter of this incredible story. Because what comes next will shock you. Battles so brutal that entire generations were lost. Empires that ruled for centuries, collapsing overnight. And a world forever scarred by the Great War. And trust me, this is just the beginning. And now, part 2 begins. The war grows darker, the battles deadlier, and the world sinks deeper into chaos. The summer of 1914 turned into autumn, and those cheerful young soldiers who had marched off with songs on their lips suddenly found themselves in a nightmare they could never have imagined. The German army had stormed into Belgium and northern France, following a bold plan known as the Schlieffen Plan, a quick strike meant to knock France out of the war before Russia could fully mobilize. At first, it worked. Towns fell, civilians fled, and the German advance looked unstoppable. But then came the Battle of the Marne in September 1914. The French, desperate to defend Paris, fought back with everything they had, even using taxis to rush soldiers to the front. The Allies managed to halt the German advance. Paris was saved, but the war had entered a deadly new phase. Unable to achieve quick victory, both sides dug into the earth. What began as temporary defensive positions turned into hundreds of miles of trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. And here, in the mud and filth, millions of men would spend the next 4 years. Life in the trenches was hell. Imagine standing knee-deep in cold mud for days, surrounded by rats and lice, the stench of death everywhere. Overhead, shells rained down constantly, shaking the earth, while snipers waited for the slightest movement. Nights were filled with the cries of the wounded, and days were endless boredom broken by sudden terror. Soldiers wrote letters home about the mud, the fear, and the haunting sight of their friends being cut down by machine guns. This was the Western Front, and it became a graveyard for an entire generation. Every inch of land was paid for in blood. Battles like Verdun in 1916 lasted nearly a year, with French and German forces slaughtering each other for control of a few hills. They shall not pass, the French vowed, and they didn't. But the cost was over 700,000 casualties. The same year, at the Battle of the Somme, the British launched a massive offensive. On the first day alone, nearly 60,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded. The bloodiest day in British military history. By the end, more than 1 million men had fallen, and the front line had barely moved. It wasn't just bullets and shells that killed. This was the first war of terrifying new weapons. Machine guns that could mow down hundreds in minutes, poison gas that silently drifted into trenches, choking men to death, and barbed wire that trapped soldiers like prey. Tanks and airplanes appeared for the first time. But in these early years, they were clumsy and unreliable. Still, technology was rewriting the very nature of war, making it deadlier than ever. While the Western Front drowned in mud and blood, the Eastern Front saw vast battles between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. Unlike the stalemate in France, the war in the East was more fluid, with sweeping advances and retreats across huge distances. But Russia, poorly equipped and badly led, suffered catastrophic losses. Its soldiers often lacked rifles, food, even boots. Morale collapsed, and in the background, another storm was brewing inside Russia itself. One that would soon change the entire course of the war. By 1917, the pressure was unbearable. Millions of Russians were dead, hunger gripped the cities, and the people had lost faith in their Tsar. In March, revolution erupted in Petrograd. The Tsar abdicated, but the provisional government tried to continue the war. That was a fatal mistake. Later that year, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power with the promise of peace, land, and bread. True to their word, they pulled Russia out of the war, signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in early 1918. For Germany, this was a huge victory. It freed their armies to focus entirely on the Western Front. But Russia's exit also left a void that would haunt Europe for decades. Meanwhile, far from Europe, another giant was stirring. The United States had tried to remain neutral, watching the carnage from across the Atlantic. But Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking ships without warning, dragged America closer to the fight. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, killing 128 Americans, shocked the world. Then came the infamous Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany urged Mexico to attack the US in exchange for lost territory. By 1917, President Woodrow Wilson could no longer stay out. On April 6th, the United States declared war on Germany. At first, America had little army to send. But with its vast resources, modern industry, and millions of fresh soldiers, the US became the game changer. By mid-1918, American troops were pouring into France, boosting Allied morale and tipping the balance against the exhausted Central Powers. But hold on. Before we march into the final phase of this war, let me ask you something. If this story has kept you hooked so far, imagine how powerful the ending will be. Collapsing empires, revolution, and the world map being redrawn before our eyes. So pause for just a second. Smash that like button. Share this with a friend who loves history. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you're ready for part 3. Because the climax of World War I is unlike anything you've ever heard before. What comes next? The final offensives, the crumbling of nations, and the day the guns finally fell silent. What comes next? The final offensives, the crumbling of nations, and the day the guns finally fell silent. Stay with me, because history is about to take us to November 11th, 1918, the day the world held its breath.